Are we sitting comfortably? Then I will start.
That's like Jack and Ori.
It's like Jack and Ori. Well, I like to start. We are telling a story, aren't we? We're going to sit down and share for half an hour and learn something together. So I'm going to introduce you, Tara. This is the wonderful Tara Porter. I am so excited to have Tara with me today. She's a clinical psychologist and author, and she has written the brilliant book, which I have here, You Don't Understand Me. And this book, actually, we're so lucky to have Tara today for a brief time, because she's off to the Netherlands on Monday to launch its translation, and also various other countries. So it's doing really, really well, this book. And I read it earlier in the summer and was just so enamored by the content and the way that the book was written and published and put out, that to have Tara talk to me today is super exciting, and to talk to you so we can pick her brains and get all of her expertise. So Tara, to give you a little bit of background, Tara is a clinical psychologist. She's been working predominantly with girls in NHS and private practice, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for this lovely comment about my book too.
Over 25 years. So we've got 2.5 decades of information here. And you recently wrote this brilliant book, You Don't Understand Me, which for once, this is what I love about it, is it's from the perspective of the growing up of a child, from the child's perspective. We are inundated with content and books directed at parents, for parents, what we need to do to control our children, what they're thinking, why they need us to do X, Y, and Z. And this is just a beautiful segue and pivot for us to, not only for our children to read, obviously, this is for our girls, this book, but I felt I was being given a gem by being given the opportunity to read something that was so aware of what they needed. And I think that's something that we're massively missing at the moment. So I am going to ask you some questions about a little bit about the book later on, but about parenting and parenting children and your insights from the amazing experience that you have had. So that's everybody. That's Tara.
Thank you. That's very generous.
I'm going to start with my first question, and I've written loads and they are quite in depth, so you can hurry me along. What I would like to know from you, from your perspective, where you're sitting opposite these hundreds and hundreds, possibly even thousands over 25 years of young girls and a span of generation, let's say, what is happening for our kids today? I know you work predominantly with girls, but you can give us an oversight or an overview. What would you say are their biggest challenges from their perspective? Because we're so focused, I think, as a generation of parents on the academics, extracurricular activity, how polite, how helpful, how articulate. But what are our children's biggest concerns?
Yeah, I think our children's biggest concerns, or what I see a lot in my clinic, is I feel that is the pressure, the sense of pressure on them, and the expectations on them. So, and um, I think a lot of it is about academics. I do hear about that an awful lot, and that's one of the major changes I think over that time I've been working with kids. The amount of academic pressure they're under, the sort of arms race of qualifications, where we seem to more and more is required of children. And I think that's sort of coming into a perfect storm with some other things that are going on in society, like our favourite one as parents, to blame the phone and to blame social media.
Yeah.
But and social media can be fantastic and good fun and a way for them to connect, and it's not all bad, but it also has created a whole heap of other expectations about the way they look, and about being constantly available to their friends, about a sort of 7-day-a-week culture. And so all of that, I think, has come into a bit of a perfect storm. And I think as parents, we get kind of sucked into that kind of, that what I call the output model of childhood, where the kid is kind of like almost like on a conveyor belt. I should be getting qualifications. I should be doing tennis camp. I should be looking this way, or I should have this many friends, and they become like almost a project, and I think that's not how they express it, but that's what I hear. That's what I pull out of their experience, that they feel that they should be doing this, they should be doing that. They have all these expectations on them.
And
Um,
are we feeding into that as parents, as we're buying into this kind of fear-based reality that we're living in, we're almost kind of putting them on that treadmill.
it's very hard, I'm really aware, putting the whole book, which is under under underpinned by that kind of idea of what I've seen in my therapy rooms in
Yeah.
clinic. And yet, as a parent, it's very hard not to get sucked into that they should be doing their best, they should be working harder, there's a lot of competition, they should be getting into a Russell Group university, all of these sorts of ideas, that can take away from, parenting as a relationship, and parenting can become like a checklist that we should be, have you done this, have you done that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this comes into question too. Thank you for leading me so
Oh.
beautifully into it. As parents of this generation, we seem to spend our children's childhoods grooming them to be adults. It's what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing in my therapy room is this grooming to be adults, which we're getting very frustrated when our children don't behave like adults. So to be blunt, when they're behaving like children, which they need to behave like children to go through this growth process into being able to be an adult. But there's this pressure and fear that if we see our children behaving like kids, I guess the term act your age, not your shoe size, and all that sort of terminology that we can throw at our children when they're being rambunctious, when they're being very emotional, when they're emotionally dysregulated, we tend to try and push them into something else because we're scared they're not going to be grown-ups or they're not going to function, but they need this process of being children and behaving like children.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about that kind of process that they need to go through, almost in a funny way, to put our students' minds at rest so they can maybe step away from this framework that we feel we're so stuck in?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you've explained it very nicely, actually, and I totally agree with everything you've said. I think I mean, I see it everywhere. I mean, even when you have a baby now, when there's, and you're looking for perhaps some childcare or some help with the baby, and nurseries sort of pride themselves on preparing babies for nursery or preschool, kind of nursery school kind of environment, child, and there's always this idea that you should be pushing the baby, the preschooler, the child, the teenager through that stage to prepare them for the next stage. And of course, that doesn't match a kind of developmental framework that, as we understand it in psychology, that actually what prepares babies for social relationships in preschool or early reception and for year one of school is having that kind of one-to-one caregiver relationship, an attachment relationship. And so this idea that you can make a baby more social by putting it in a social environment when it's sort of, under one or between 1 and 2 is, it reflects that idea that you're referring to, this idea that we should be always sort of pushing and pre-preparing our kids for the next phase. And actually what they need to do is be in that phase. An attachment relationship is key to understanding the whole of life, really. And so, I mean, I bring it to babies, but let me take it to teenagers, which is mainly what my book is about. And,
Yes.
in teenage years, I think we get very, frustrated when teenagers don't do what they're told, when they test the boundaries, when their ideas challenge our ideas. Of course, that's exactly what teenagers should be doing. That's how society progresses. That's how new ideas come in.
Yeah.
And we did it with our parents, and our parents did it with their parents, and Shakespeare wrote about it. So it's that idea that by going through that phase of being a teenager, about not having responsibility, about having time, having space, by challenging the boundaries, by thinking about things in a different way, society will progress. And no doubt will take on some of their new ideas in another generation. I think about when I was a teenager and I objected to this kind of Miss and Mrs. versus Mr. idea. And my dad didn't get that at all. Whereas now it's about pronouns and they and them rather than he and she. And we, and lots of people of our kind of generation, parents' generation, don't get that. But it's a way that the young people, whether that will stick around or not, only time will tell. But I give it as an example of how, the teenage generation are pushing at the boundaries that we created, and thinking about how things can be different. And of course, it probably settles somewhere in between.
Absolutely. I mean, what I hear a lot is that this seems to be a problem, this challenge, this lack of agreement. It's almost looked upon as like insolence or disrespect. And it seems like, and actually, I'm going to refer to another book who. It's gone out of my mind now. 101 Things Only Girls.
Lorraine Candy, yes,
Lorraine Candy. Yeah. Fabulous book, great book, got a lot of humor to it as well. And I feel like her overarching message is it's not about you. It's kind of what I felt when I got from that. It's, as you're raising teenagers, it's really not about you. And everything we seem to hear as parents, we get this backlash to our kids of, they spoke to me badly, or it was, and actually maybe if we could just let go a little bit more of this kind of immediate clash to kind of create respect or agreement or behavior, we can allow our children to be that bit closer to us, because we seem to keep pushing them away every time we retaliate. And actually, remember, they're meant to be doing this, and it's not about us, is it? It's actually, isn't it a physiological chemical reaction and response that happens between parent and child as they move into the adolescent years? They literally do physiologically detach from us.
Yeah, it's a biological drive. It's an evolutionary drive, because otherwise
beautifully said.
Our kids would stay living with us forever, wouldn't they? And actually what they need to do is they need to go forward into their own world, into their own lives. And so the separation and the individuation needs to happen.
It's this.
I suppose I just want to apologize. My phone rang. I thought I don't understand technology that well. I thought I turned off all the focus here. But anyway, I apologize to you.
Don't worry about it. We're in life. We actually are. We might be on here, but we are also in life. And maybe we all need to kind of allow that a little bit more, isn't it? It's all this it should be. It should be. I should have my phone off. My child should speak like this. They should do that. They should be getting these grades. Should they?
Well, go back to your question. I guess what I would say is that I both want to sort of sit with the parents watching this and say, it's really frustrating when your child is rude to you. It's so frustrating, especially when you do a lot for them and they don't appreciate you, and it's completely developmentally normal, and it's not personal, and it's not about you. Both of those things are true. And it's not that you should just sort of give in to the way they speak to you. Of course, you need to carry on setting the boundary and saying, no, that's not acceptable. That isn't how you behave. With socializing them into the world. But also you've got to try not to take it personally, because it is an evolutionary drive to separate from your parents and to make your own life.
Absolutely.
And to push, from an evolutionary perspective, to push them out to go and procreate, just not yet.
I think we'd be far better at creating those social guidelines that you mention, if we can take what you've said and really own it and internalize it and not be reactive. Because what I'm hearing predominantly is we don't actually go, that's not acceptable, and speaking to me that way, and we let the calm we go straight back in with almost a similar reaction because we've taken it so personally, excuse the train, that we miss the opportunity to create connection and social awareness, and we go straight into conflicts, especially when we're looking at teenagers. I think it's easier when they're younger because they're almost more separate from our age. They get a little bit closer and a little bit closer, and it feels much more personal, doesn't it?
Yes, I think, well, also as parents, it's the different stuff going on as a child as well. They do want to be close to us. That's their ultimate thing when they're, and as a teenager, they want to pull away, and they want to pull away, and they want to be, and at times they want to swing back towards us. So.
Well, it's that game, isn't it, with teenagers? It's like, okay, I'm still going to hold you, which actually brings me to another question, which I hadn't written down, but this idea of expectation, I'm wrapping it all together, this idea of expectation, and we're pushing, we have these expectations, and we're almost trying to raise our children to be adults before they're able to be adults. We're kind of teaching them to be adults rather than letting them be kids. and how to deal with teenagers in their step into autonomy. But there's this funny grey area that I can see with the pressures of culture and society, with academia, with extracurricular activities, with the extra socialization that we're experiencing right now, 2022, 2023, is this age of kind of 8 to 12.
The
They
teenagers.
do want, with the pre-ages, they want to be closer, and they're kind of almost being pushed a little bit ahead of the game to go a little bit ahead of themselves and be more grown up and more autonomous and have more of a sense of who they are than they possibly can at, say, 9, 10, 11 years old. Are you seeing that in your work?
Yeah, I do hear about that a lot. I tend to work less with that age group myself, but I do hear about that sort of what they call them the teenagers a lot. You know that well, what we know is that kids are going into puberty slightly younger, and we're not quite sure about the reasons for that. But so there does seem to be something about, well, that's a complicated reasons why that might be, but also we see societal pressures that, as we've discussed, you know, the idea of pushing kids to prepare them for the next stage. I wonder whether that also touches on, you know, things like capitalism, how you know, kids always want to be looking upwards, they always want to be looking at the next stage, don't they? So they, you know, teenagers kind of want to dress like teenagers, and as a sort of, you know, the marketing towards sort of sexualization of that age group as well, particularly towards girls. Also about phones, you know, the kind of the pressure. It used to be that kids got a telephone when they went to secondary school. That was the time, and then it became year 6, and now it's sort of end of year 5, and the sort of pushing of that. So I think we have to be really careful about that, about how we prepare kids for those at those ages. How we can't be completely ignoring the society that they live in. You don't want your kid to be the sort of the lone outlier in their class that doesn't do things, but also you don't want to be pushing them too far along to be a teenager before they are a teenager, yes, before they're, you know, ready for that.
Yes, I mean, I have a 10-year-old boy, so as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about it, and I what I find very interesting is this very mature sense of self, which, like you say, I think could be on the backlash of, or just kind of in reaction to society, the framework, but the lack of ability in many ways to kind of process their emotions, the nervous system still being quite like kind of underdeveloped, and it has these big feelings, the kind of almost tantrum but not tantrum type kind of reactions to things that feel big, and inability to articulate themselves. I feel very lucky because of the work that I do has enabled me to see that as a developmental process. But from the other side, as a therapist, I have many clients that see that as very problematic, rather than holding space for it in order to help that stage grow and develop into the next phase where they're next emotionally ready to deal. It gets shut down and almost tried to be repressed, rather than an understanding that they're still very much children, at that age.
Yes. I mean, I sometimes say to parents that if you're struggling with these issues, that the truth is probably, or the best thing is somewhere in the middle, and the pull and the push, from pushing the kids forwards to letting them be a child, is part of that push, isn't it? What's right at each stage, I think, is really important. Yeah.
The need behind the behavior. Are they wanting more autonomy, or are they needing more protection at this point? And it's that dance, isn't it? Looking at it and going, okay, how do I need to show up? I think it's kind of constantly going back to ourselves and going, how do I need to show up for them in this moment, rather than what are they doing wrong in this moment?
And kids are genetically programmed to push. They're genetically programmed to push those boundaries, but often they do kind of want us to say no. and that they don't want to do that thing, which is just a little bit scary and a little bit more grown up. And they're quite pleased when parents say no, and then they can kind of go to their friends, oh, my mum won't let me, and roll their eyes. But
Yeah.
actually, it's a bit of a relief sometimes. But I think it's about knowing your own kid in that sense, isn't it? Of what your kid is ready for, and just trying to be having that empathic relationship where you can be in touch with what's going on for them.
Well, how do you think we as parents can help ourselves to stay open to that empathic relationship? What can we be doing?
I think one of the things is, when we're really, really busy trying to get them to do stuff, it's very hard to then to be empathic, because you're spending too much time driving around and getting them to put their shoes on and help making them practice stuff and to do their homework. So I think there is some part of it which is around letting go of the doing, or allowing spaces when there isn't doing. Of course, any real life involves some doing, and thinking about how to be with your children. Your children is parenting is a relationship. It's not a to-do list, you know, and thinking about how we are in relationships with everybody. What do we want from relationships? We want people to listen to us. We want people to value our ideas. We want to be heard and seen, and that's what kids want, really.
Absolutely. It's what we all want. We forget that they're just very small versions of us.
Well, yes, in that way they are, yes. I mean, we've talked earlier about the different developmental stages. In some ways they're not, but in that way, of course, they want to be heard and listened to.
And understood.
Yeah.
So what would you say your children, I'm going to say your children that you've worked with over so many years, all these wonderful children that have been in and out of your offices, would you say that they struggle with the most with regards to their relationship with their parents?
It's they're not listening.
They're not listening.
It is the not listening. I think without a shadow of a doubt. I think often as parents we tend to listen and wait for the pause in the conversation where we can jump in and tell them what to do, and that's, I think, is a major problem. I think it's funny. It's one of those ones that is which we don't learn from experience, because you ask any woman, do you want your mum to tell you what to do?
It's so true.
It's so true, isn't it? Did you want your mum to tell you what to do when you were a teenager? Has anyone ever answered, oh yes, that's what I wanted? And so the kind of being with them, which I referred to in the other question, not the doing but the being, and just allowing them to talk about it and giving them the space to talk about it. I mean, in some ways that's what I do in therapy, and sometimes I might nudge. I might say, well, what do you think about this? What would be the pros and cons of that? But that giving of advice, do they want advice? No, not really. They want them to just listen and understand, and actually it's through listening and understanding and true empathy that we find it gives people the space to find solutions to their own problems, but also it's how we build a relationship.
Sure. Is it helpful for, as a parent, in trying to develop their listening journey, to because it can offset the kids as well a little bit when we start to really change our behavior? They can be a bit like, what's going on? Can it be helpful to offer when they're talking and you've had a conversation and they've maybe got to the end of whatever it is that they're saying, and to say, would you like my advice, or are you just happy that I've listened? Is that helpful to them, or
I think it's really helpful, and particularly in the teenage years, that's
for a parent to feel like that? Because I think as parents we just want to feel like we're doing something, and I think we feel like we're not being good parents if we're not telling them what to do or making a suggestion, and all we want to do is be good parents. But it sounds like what you're saying, these kids are actually saying, if to be a good parent to me, just shut up.
They're not saying that no child has ever said that to me. Well, maybe they have, I'm not sure. But I think that they don't want you know that thing I said at the beginning of the last question about, you know, the advice and the kind of jumping in, and as parents we're so aware, we've always got that kind of our eye on the clock, we need to go on to the next thing. Our kid comes to us with a problem, but we want it sewn up neatly and put away, and actually what they want is probably a space to be heard and to be validated and to think about it. You know, they don't want to be told, well, you should do this. They don't want to be told, well, I told you that would happen. You know, nobody wants these things.
That's the worst. That's the worst thing to hear. I often make that kind of reflection back to the adult. I go, well, how would you feel if your best friend or your partner actually responded in this way? And we forget how we as adults would. They are little adults. They're becoming adults as teenagers. So that's really interesting.
Yes, and I sometimes say in that. Yeah, I sometimes say about I bring up that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, which was very popular about 20 years ago. I don't know if you remember it, but it was the premise was that women want men to listen and men want to solve women's problems. And sometimes I sort of joke with parents that parents are from Mars and teenagers are from Venus, because teenagers come with the problems, and parents want to say, I'm wise, I have this knowledge, I've lived through this, so you don't have to. But of course we don't learn from other people's experience, we don't take on other people's advice, we, you know. And if you jump in too quickly with advice, people think you don't understand anyway. And that's true in therapy as in parenting relationships.
Of course, of course. Have you got a couple more minutes if I just ask you a couple more questions? Thank you so much, because I could go on with that for hours with you. One very quick one. It's not a very quick answer. It's not going to be at all. But you talk about boundaries. You mentioned them earlier. I think there's a very big miscommunication about what boundaries actually are. You know, boundaries are about safety and personal respect for self and what we are capable of doing, and that goes the same for our children, teaching boundaries. But when we talk about boundaries in kind of the social construct of parenting, we talk more about rules and compliance. And if we're and shout at me if you think that this is incorrect, but I often feel that today when we look at boundaries, we're almost, the way we see boundaries, the way that we are conditioned and socialized to look at boundaries and how to show up for our kids with this framework, we're looking more at breaking down all of their boundaries and having our own. If we look, like, because really we're just asking them to do what we want them to do all of the time. So what would you say, what are your thoughts on boundaries, rules, punishment, and how they can affect our relationship with our children? Just a little umbrella there for you.
Umbrella, yeah, I could write an encyclopedia on that. I think I agree with you that boundaries are really important, and rules is another word for boundaries in a sense. And there's quite a bit of evidence in the literature that the kind of the style of parenting which has really, you know, which is really, if you like, most successful bringing up happy kids is a kind of quite firm but kind style of parent. But those rules are kind of clearly defined, they're discussed, and when they get into teenage years, they're negotiated. I'm not so keen on the idea of punishment. I think that, you know, consequences to kids' actions are often, you know, may be necessary, and sometimes you do have to lay a line in the sand if you can't get, you know, you can't get a compliance on something which you think is harming your child very, very severely. But I think a relationship which just is built around rules and punishment, you know, we tend to call that an authoritarian parenting style, and that's not a great way to be. If particularly, I guess, in teenage years, which is what I'm thinking about most here, because if you get into punishments with kids when they break rules, and as we've seen earlier, teenagers are sort of genetically programmed to break the rules, to push the boundaries. They're not going to come to you when they break the rule and they get into trouble, and that's what you want them to do. If they go to a party and they get drunk and they weren't meant to be at the party and they weren't meant to get drunk, and then they haven't got a way to get home, or they get into an awkward situation where they fear that they're going to be assaulted or something like that, we want them to be able to phone us and for them to know that we're not going to come down really in a punitive way. We're going to come down in a way that's, proportional, thoughtful, reasonable, and discuss what next, really.
Yeah.
And that might involve some sort of, consequence for your action. We're disappointed, you lied to us, or something like that. But it might, if it's very, very strict and not done with warmth and kindness, then the next time they're not going to call you.
So it feels like a very lenient response at times when one is very, very, probably very stressed ourselves because we're very worried and anxious for our child. We have to be careful to kind of calm down in a sensible space so that we can maintain that connection rather than coming from respect rather than fear, I guess, isn't it?
Yes, and respect is, yes. I mean, every parent in the moment has responded in a way with, said the wrong thing and come down like, well, if you do that, you're grounded till you're 32 or whatever. Not quite
forever.
30, and obviously you've got to have enough leeway in it. So it's kind of that idea of firm and flexible boundaries that seem to be important in teenage years.
Yeah. I talk about stone boundaries and sand boundaries, and the stone boundaries are about safety, essentially. Anything that's got to keep you alive and is within the safety of you and those around you, that these have to be adhered to. Everything else is up for conversation.
Yeah, but you see, the other thing is that by the time they get to 18, they're making their own boundaries on those sorts of things and what's
sure.
Yeah, and it's so all those boundaries, all those rules have to be let go of by the time they're an adult. So that has to be a flexible process.
Yes, absolutely. It's hard though. It's a dance. It's a dance, isn't it?
It's a real dance, yes.
To get to it. I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions about the book because. So I wanted to give everyone a little bit of background to it because I'm sure you've all been Googling it whilst we've been talking and you all ordered your copies of it straight away, and they'll be coming tomorrow on Amazon. But the book kind of is like it's like a dictionary, like an encyclopedia for kids, right? For these young women. We cover friendship, social media, body consciousness, most importantly for us, the relationship between like parent and child, right? So it's incredible insight for the girls, which was, I'm sure your main, or I'm not sure, you're going to tell me your main focus was I want to write this book for the girls. I found it invaluable as a parent. Can you give us a little bit of background on what your inspiration was with regards to putting this book together and why you were one of the so few people to think amazingly, and thank you for it, to think these kids need something that they don't have?
Yeah, thank you. That's a lovely question to answer. I mean, I guess a lot of it came from sort of therapeutic letters I write some of my patients. So sometimes when we've been struggling with something, we've been in the therapy session and we're trying to hold on to a psychological concept, we're trying to think about how they feel about something, about how it relates to the relationship with their friends, with their parents. It's complex stuff and it's abstract stuff and it's difficult to hold in mind. And sometimes at the end of a session, I will just jot it into a letter with young people, or I'll jot them an email the next day, just thinking about that thing we were talking about yesterday and wondering about this. And so it came from having done that, writing to young people about their own psychological well-being and their own psychological health. That was where the inspiration came from. I think one of the first bits that I wrote was the bit about friendship and the on-off friend and social power in friendships, which is something I often have to sort of explain to young people. So that's where it came from, really. And I think it was the book I was meant to write because it really poured out of me once I started writing it, that, all the experience of all the young the young people. And I've always done a bit of writing on the side of being a psychologist, but this was the book that came that came pouring out, really.
It feels like that happened in such a kind of it's such a kind of a natural, organic way. It's very easy to lose oneself in the words of the book, because you're very much, I felt personally, and everyone can feedback once they've read the book, I felt very much like I was kind of on the journey with my daughter, and the incredible insights of kind of how she sees things, how the way I show up might be taken the wrong way and not be helpful, actually, and a lot of retrospective awareness of my own journey with my parents. So it's a really beautiful read. It really is a really beautiful read. Congratulations. The final question: through writing this book, because I know you have children yourself, because I've listened to you speak, which was a wonderful experience for me, and you mentioned that you have children yourself, how would you say that the insights from writing the book and from 25 years in practice have impacted your relationship?
I find that a really difficult question to answer, actually.
Because you wouldn't have any idea what it's like not to have been impacted.
I found that it's symbiotic, they're intertwined. I was a psychologist before I was a mother, I have to say, but once I became a mum, I became very interested in attachment theory when I was
it goes through
going through the different stages. So I found it really difficult to disentangle how I parent from being a psychologist and my experience as a psychologist. But having said that, I have to fess up that sometimes I leave the psychologist at work in a way, and I come home and I'm all sort of grumpy and frustrated and making all the mistakes that we've talked about today, reacting out of a place of fear and not out of a place of empathy, or of frustration, or so I think I can't. I guess what that enables me to do as a psychologist is then come back from this and think, what am I doing here? This isn't the way I think that I should be. But
that's sorry to interrupt you. That's actually a lovely way to finish for my parents who are here doing amazing work. They're stepping up. All of you that are watching us and a part of this interview today, you're choosing to step up and do the work to be the best version of yourself, the best parent, grow, evolve, have empathy, have compassion. And I think the biggest stumbling block that they and I and you, Tara, have just admitted to come across is it doesn't matter how much work you do, you're still a parent and you're still a human, and there's no right way to do it. And even if there is, you wouldn't get it right 100% of the time. And so as they're on this journey themselves, doing so much work, having so much insight, learning so much, resonating with so much, so they're great boundaries and triggers and it all makes sense, and I'm doing this and I'm not doing that, but we fall into our old patterns, and we fall into being just very scared parents who just care about our kids so much we'll do whatever it takes, and sometimes it's the wrong thing. And so I hope for them to hear you, 25 years in practice, you've written a fabulous book, you've got children who are growing up beautifully, and you're doing it too. So
I'm making mistakes too. I am. I fess up.
And I think that's really helpful for our listeners and our watchers, our viewers, to see that and know that and have a bit of compassion for themselves in the humanness of what that is.
And that's important, and what's also important in that is then coming back and saying, oh, sorry, I just got in, I had a puncture, I had a bad day at work, I was really grumpy, I was really tired, I was really hungry, I shouldn't have said that was the wrong thing. That's important. It's a lesson.
It's a great lesson for them. Own it. Oh, Tara, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
I could talk to you for hours. Really, thank you for answering all my questions. And again, everybody, order it. It is actually in the bonus material in the reading list already, but if you've seen it there, so you can order that anytime. And good luck with the book, and good luck with the continuous translating of the book into many languages across Europe and the world, which is fantastic, because sharing this with the world is what needs to happen. And thank you again hugely for your time. I really appreciate it.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Tara.